The ring was still on my finger when he looked at her for the third time in under 2 minutes. Not a glance, not a casual scan of the room. A look. The kind that has weight to it. The kind that pulls your whole body towards someone like gravity. And I was standing right there in my dress, holding a small bouquet of white carnations I'd bought myself from the Walgreens 2 blocks from the courthouse, because nobody had thought to get me flowers. Nobody except me. I remember thinking, so this is how it ends. Not with a fight, not with a slammed door or a thrown plate, with a look across a waiting room that told me everything 3 years of my life had been building toward, and it wasn't me on the other end of it. His name was Derek Callahan. He was 31, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who could fix a truck engine and quote Steinbeck in the same afternoon. I was 24, a barista at the only decent coffee shop in Ridge Creek, Alaska, a remote work camp town so far north that in December, the sun barely bothered to show up before slipping back under the horizon. I had followed him there. That was the first thing I should have told myself to remember. I had followed him. He had never once followed me anywhere. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this actually started, back to before the courthouse, before the carnations, before the moment I slid that ring off my finger and set it down on a plastic chair like it was nothing more than a hair tie I'd found in my pocket. 3 years earlier, December had looked completely different to me. I'd grown up in Spokane, Washington, middle of nowhere by coastal standards, but a real city by mine. I'd been working coffee since I was 19, starting at a chain place in a strip mall, moving up to a specialty roaster downtown where I learned to actually care about what I was pouring. I was good at it. I had regulars who came in specifically for my shifts. I knew the difference between a ristretto and a lungo without having to think about it. It wasn't a glamorous career, but it was mine, and I was building something with it, slowly, the way you build anything real. Derek walked into that downtown roaster on a Tuesday morning in November, the year I was 21. He was passing through Spokane on his way back to an oil and gas work camp up north, killing time before his flight. He ordered a cortado, which already made me like him more than most of the guys who came in asking for just a regular coffee. He sat at the counter. We talked for 40 minutes. He missed his flight on purpose. He told me that later, laughing, like it was the most romantic thing a person could do. And honestly, back then, I thought it was. He was working a rotational schedule up at a remote camp outside a small town called Ridge Creek, way up in the northern edge of Alaska. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. During his off weeks, he started spending them in Spokane. With me. It happened fast, the way things do when distance forces you to be intentional about your time together. Every 2 weeks felt like a concentrated version of a relationship. No boring Tuesday evenings watching TV half checked out. No drifting. Just him and me, and every hour having a purpose. By the time we'd been together 8 months, he asked me to move up to Ridge Creek with him. "There's a coffee shop at the camp," he said. We were sitting in my studio apartment, eating takeout Thai food off paper plates because I'd never owned real dishes. "They're looking for someone who actually knows what they're doing. The guy running it now makes espresso like he's punishing the beans personally." I laughed. I also felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear exactly, but awareness. The awareness of a person standing at the edge of something large, looking down. "Ridge Creek," I said. Derek, that's genuinely in the middle of nowhere." "Yeah," he said, not apologetically. "It is." I asked for 2 weeks to think about it. I thought about it for 4 days and then called him and said yes. My mom thought I was insane. My best friend Tanya said, and I quote, "Zoe, you barely know where Alaska is on a map." She wasn't wrong. I drove to CVS, bought one of those foam board maps of the United States for $4.99 and had to tape a separate piece of paper to the top of it to fit Alaska in. But I went. I packed everything I owned into a 2009 Civic with a cracked rear bumper, and I drove to Seattle, shipped the car, flew to Fairbanks, and drove the rest of the way on a road that at some points felt less like infrastructure and more like a suggestion. Ridge Creek was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected. Some kind of romantic frontier existence, maybe. The kind you see in Instagram posts from people who move to Montana and make it look windswept and meaningful. Ridge Creek was functional. It was built around the work camp, which meant everything. The housing, the small commercial strip, the social life, orbited around the schedules and needs of people who worked in extraction. There was a general store, a medical clinic, a bar called the Slope Bar that smelled like fried food and industrial soap, and the coffee shop where I got hired within a week of arriving. The shop was called Base Camp Coffee. It was small, 6 tables, a counter, an espresso machine that was better than it had any right to be given the location. My boss was a man named Gary Fenwick, who had been running the place for 4 years and had a management style that I can only describe as controlled indifference. He wasn't cruel, not at first. He was simply the kind of person who believed that anyone working for him should be quietly grateful for the opportunity, regardless of what the opportunity actually paid. My starting wage was $14.50 an hour. In Ridge Creek, where a 1-bedroom apartment ran $1,100 a month because of the housing scarcity in the area, that was not a living wage, it was a holding pattern. Derek was making good money on the oil side, and at first, that felt fine. We were a team. His income covered the rent, mine covered food, utilities, the small things. I didn't love the arrangement, but I told myself it was temporary. I was building experience. I was learning the business side of running a small cafe. I was going to ask Gary for a raise after 6 months. I did ask. 6 months in, I sat across from Gary in the back room that he used as an office, a room that smelled like old invoices and burnt coffee grounds, and I laid out my case. I'd increased the morning customer count by 30%. I'd introduced 2 new menu items that were now the top sellers. I'd trained the new hire Marcus from scratch. Gary listened with his arms crossed and his head tilted slightly, the way someone listens when they've already decided the answer. "You're doing great, Zoe," he said. "Really. But the margins here are tight. I can't justify a raise right now." "What would justify it?" I asked. He smiled, not warmly. "Time," he said. "Keep doing what you're doing. We'll revisit." We revisited 6 months after that. Same answer, different phrasing. By the time Derek and I had been together 2.5 years, I was still making $14.50 an hour. I'd never gotten a single cent more. Gary had, however, hired a new assistant manager, a guy named Phil, who had no coffee experience, was Gary's former neighbor's son, and started at $18 an hour. I found out from Marcus, who had seen the onboarding paperwork by accident. I went home that evening and sat at our kitchen table in the apartment, a small 2-bedroom that Derek had upgraded us to when his contract renewed, and I did the math on a piece of paper. Not for the first time. I'd been doing this math for months, quietly, in the margins of my consciousness. My income, on its own, did not cover rent, did not cover utilities, did not cover groceries. My income on its own was not enough to live in Ridge Creek without Derek's financial support. That was when I understood, really understood, in my body, not just in my head, that I had been slowly, quietly, financially boxed in. I hadn't noticed it happening because it had happened gradually. A wage that never grew. A location that offered no alternative employers in my field. A relationship that had, without either of us explicitly designing it that way, made me economically dependent on a man I had followed to the edge of the map. Derek came home that night, smelling like cold air and engine grease, same as always. He kissed me on the temple, opened the refrigerator, stood there looking into it for a long moment. "You okay?" he said without turning around. "Yeah," I said. "Fine." I folded up the piece of paper with the math on it and put it in my jacket pocket. I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. I wasn't even sure what I would say. What do you tell someone when you've realized the life you built together has quietly arranged itself so that you can't leave it? He pulled out a container of leftover pasta, set it on the counter and said, "Gary give you that raise yet?" Something moved through me that I didn't have a name for. Not anger, not sadness, something colder than both. "No," I said. "He didn't." Derek made a sound, half acknowledgement, half dismissal. "He's kind of a tool," he said, and put the pasta in the microwave. I watched him stand there in our kitchen, waiting for the microwave to beep, completely at ease in a life that was costing him very little, and I thought, he doesn't understand. He has never understood. He makes good money, his income is his choices are his freedom is entirely intact. He has no idea what it means to look at a budget and realize the exit door is locked from the outside. The microwave beeped. He brought 2 bowls to the table and sat across from me, and we ate dinner and talked about something on TV, and I smiled when I was supposed to smile, and I said nothing about the piece of paper in my pocket. But I kept it. For 3 more months, I kept doing that math, kept folding it up, kept putting it away. And then December came back around, the 2nd December in Ridge Creek, the one that would eventually lead to a courthouse in the pale afternoon light, to white carnations from Walgreens, to a man who couldn't stop looking at someone who wasn't me. It started, of all things, with the company holiday party. Gary announced it on the first Monday of December. Base Camp Coffee was hosting a small gathering, a thank you to regulars, a networking event for the work camp management. He posted a sign-up sheet on the back room door. Staff were expected to work it, unpaid. "Think of it as team building," Gary said, with the confidence of a man who had never once questioned whether his own time had value. I stared at that sign-up sheet for a full 60 seconds. Then I signed my name, because I didn't see another option. That was when Marcus leaned over and said quietly, "Derek's boss is coming to this thing. Fenwick's trying to get a catering contract with the camp management." I looked at him. "Gary's using this party to pitch a contract?" "That's what I heard," Marcus said, and went back to wiping down the counter. I looked at the sign-up sheet, my name in my own handwriting, volunteering my unpaid Saturday evening so that my boss could use the event I'd helped set up to make himself money. I picked up the pen. I did not cross my name off. Not yet. But something shifted in me that Monday morning, quiet and cold and certain, the way a crack moves through ice, slowly, then all at once, dot. The party was on a Saturday, the 2nd week of December, and Gary had us set up by 4 in the afternoon for a 6 o'clock start. I spent 2 hours arranging a table of coffee drinks, small pastries we'd ordered from a place in Fairbanks, and a display of Base Camp branded merchandise that Gary had invested in, mugs, thermoses, tote bags, all of which he'd apparently purchased with the shop's operating budget without telling the staff. Marcus and I worked in silence mostly, the kind of silence that happens between 2 people who both know something is wrong but aren't ready to say it yet. The guests started arriving at 6:15. Work camp management, a few contractors, some regulars from town. I was pouring drinks, keeping the table stocked, smiling the way you smile when your face is doing the job independently of the rest of you. Derek arrived around 7, which surprised me. I hadn't expected him to come. He'd mentioned the party in passing, but hadn't said he was planning to attend. He came in with 2 men from his crew, and then, behind them, a woman I had never seen before. She was tall, maybe 5'10", with dark hair pulled back in a low braid. She was wearing a dark green jacket and the kind of effortless self-possession that you can't buy and can't fake. She laughed at something one of the men said as they came through the door, and the laugh was the kind that made everyone in a 10-foot radius instinctively turn toward it. Derek turned toward it too. I watched him from behind the coffee table, the way his posture shifted, the way his eyes found her and then kept finding her, over and over, through the next hour. The way a compass keeps finding north, regardless of how many times you turn it. I found out her name later that evening from Marcus, who had overheard Gary greeting her. Renata Okafor. She just transferred to the camp in November as a new project engineer, smart, competent, and, as I was gathering from every person in that room with working eyeballs, extremely striking. She and Derek had apparently been working in the same unit for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I'd been in Ridge Creek for almost 2 years by then, and in that time, Derek had never once mentioned a woman named Renata. I poured coffee and smiled and kept my eyes soft and my hands steady, and I thought, I could be wrong. I could be reading something into nothing. People look at attractive people. That's just biology. It doesn't mean anything. By 9 o'clock, I had stopped telling myself that. It wasn't any single thing. It was the accumulation, the way he touched her elbow when he passed her a drink, a gesture too brief for anyone else to notice, but exactly the kind of touch you know when you see it, because you felt it yourself. The way she looked back at him when she thought no one was watching, the way he laughed differently around her, looser, more himself somehow than he ever seemed to be around me anymore. I drove home alone at 10:30. Derek stayed at the party. He texted me at midnight. Still here, got pulled into a work thing. Don't wait up. I set my phone face down on the nightstand and lay in the dark and counted the water stains on the ceiling of our apartment. There were 7. I had never noticed them before. He came home at 2. I pretended to be asleep. After that, I started paying attention differently. Not obsessively, I want to be clear about that, because I know how this sounds, and I know the version of this story where the woman becomes unhinged and starts surveilling her partner and loses herself in the spiral of suspicion. I didn't do that. I just stopped looking away from things I had been instinctively softening in my mind for months. He started working late more frequently. He bought new cologne without mentioning it. He became careful with his phone in a way he had never been before, not hiding it exactly, but angling it slightly away when a message came in, the small, unconscious choreography of a person managing a secret. I noticed all of it. I filed it away. I said nothing. Because here is the thing I hadn't fully worked through yet. Even if I was right about everything, I didn't know what I was going to do about it. I was 23 years old in a remote Alaskan work camp town with $2,400 in savings, a wage that didn't cover my rent, no car loan in my name, no lease in my name, and a professional reference list that consisted entirely of Gary Fenwick, who had refused to give me a raise twice and would give me a lukewarm recommendation if I was lucky. My entire life in Ridge Creek was structurally dependent on Derek. That was the thing that made me feel sick in a way that the suspicion itself didn't. The suspicion was painful. The financial reality was suffocating. I started doing the math again, but differently this time. Not the resignation math I'd been doing for a year, the math of a person calculating how trapped they are. This time I was doing exit math. What would it take? What were the actual numbers? How long would it take me to build a cushion that meant I had a choice? I called Tanya in late December, standing outside the coffee shop on my break, the temperature at 12 degrees, and my breath making clouds in the dark air. We hadn't talked properly in months. I'd let the distance do what distance does. Let the calls get shorter and the texts less frequent. Let myself become a person who was easier to maintain at arm's length, because the full truth of my situation was too embarrassing to say out loud. "Zoe," she said when I told her, "not all of it, just enough. The wages, the finances, the growing feeling that the relationship and the location had fused into a single trap. Why didn't you tell me it was like this?" "Because I chose it," I said. "I chose to go. I didn't want to admit that the choice was turning out to be a bad one." "That's not how it works," she said. "You can make a choice and then later get more information and make a different choice. That's not weakness. That's just being a person." I stood outside in the 12-degree dark and felt something loosen in my chest that had been clenched for a very long time. "I don't have enough money to leave," I said. "That's the actual problem. Even if I wanted to, right now, today, I couldn't." "Okay," Tanya said. "So we figure out the money. What do you need?" I told her the number, what I'd need for first and last month's rent somewhere, a plane ticket, a buffer to live on while I found a new job. She didn't flinch at it. She said, "I can cover half of that if you need me to. Consider it a loan. Pay me back when you're on your feet." I pressed my free hand flat against the outside wall of the coffee shop and breathed. The cold bit at my fingers. "I'm not there yet," I said. "I'm not ready to go yet. I still don't know for certain what's happening with Derek. I might be wrong about everything." "You're not wrong," Tanya said, with the quiet certainty of someone who has known you for 15 years and is done watching you minimize yourself. I didn't answer, but I didn't argue either. I went back inside. I made espresso. I smiled at customers, and for the first time in 2 years, I had a number in my head. A real, concrete, achievable number, and a person in my corner who would help me reach it. That number felt like a door handle in the dark. I couldn't open the door yet, but I could feel the shape of it. 2 weeks later, Derek proposed. I am not exaggerating when I say that I did not see it coming. I had been so deep in the quiet logic of my exit plan, so focused on the accumulation of evidence and the arithmetic of escape, that I had completely failed to account for the possibility that he would move in the opposite direction. He did it on a Sunday evening in January, made dinner, which he almost never did, set the table with actual candles, which we did not own until apparently he had gone out and bought some. He had a ring, a small, clean solitaire in a white gold band. He got down on one knee on our kitchen floor, which still had a scuff mark near the refrigerator that we'd never gotten around to fixing, and he asked me to marry him. I looked at him. His face was open and earnest and completely sincere, and I thought, "You don't know what I know," or "You do know, and this is how you're managing it," by escalating towards something permanent, by making the structure more fixed so the cracks inside it are harder to see. Either way, I said yes. I know how that sounds. I've asked myself 100 times since then why I said yes in that moment, with everything I suspected, with the number I was quietly building toward, with Tanya's voice still in my memory saying, "You're not wrong." And the truest answer I can give is this: I wasn't ready to end it. Not yet. Because ending it meant acting on a suspicion I hadn't confirmed, and I am not someone who burns things down on a maybe. I needed to know. I needed to be certain before I could let myself be certain, so I put the ring on my finger, and I kept watching. The answer came in February, on a Wednesday night, when Derek was supposed to be working a late shift, and I stayed late at base camp to do a full inventory count. Marcus was there with me until about 8, and then he left, and Gary had gone home hours ago, and I was alone with the stockroom and a clipboard, and the kind of bone-tired loneliness that settles into you when you've been carrying something heavy in silence for too long. I was locking up the back door when I saw them. The parking lot behind the building was lit by 2 overhead fluorescents that buzzed faintly in the cold. Derek's truck was parked against the far wall. He was leaning against the driver's side door, and Renata was standing in front of him, close enough that I could see even from across the lot that this was not a conversation between coworkers. His hand was at her waist. She had her head tilted up toward him. They were talking quietly, and then they weren't talking at all. I stood at the back door of Base Camp Coffee with my keys in my hand and the clipboard against my chest, and I watched my fiancé kiss another woman in a parking lot in February in Ridge Creek, Alaska. The temperature was -8. I felt none of it. I went back inside. I sat down on an overturned milk crate in the stockroom. I did not cry, which surprised me, not because I'm not a person who cries, but because I had apparently been braced for this for so long that the actual confirmation was almost a relief. A grim, hollow relief, like finally getting a diagnosis you'd suspected for months. At least now you know. At least now you can move. I sat on that milk crate for exactly 11 minutes. I watched the clock on the wall, and then I stood up, straightened my jacket, picked up my clipboard, and finished the inventory. Because here is what I understood in those 11 minutes. I had a ring on my finger, no money of my own, no exit in place, and a man in the parking lot who was going to come home tonight and probably kiss me on the temple the way he always did. And if I confronted him tonight, in this state, with no plan and no resources and no way out, I would lose. Not in a dramatic sense, in a practical one. He would apologize or deny or reframe, and I would have no leverage and no ground to stand on, and I would end up staying out of financial necessity while everything got worse. So I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I called Tanya from the stockroom at 9:15 and said, very quietly, "I need to take you up on the offer." She didn't ask me to explain. She just said, "Okay, tell me what you need and when." I told her. We made a plan. It was going to take 6 weeks, 6 weeks of working every shift Gary would give me, 6 weeks of depositing every paycheck into an account Derek didn't know existed, 6 weeks of being a person who had decided but not yet acted, 6 weeks of wearing that ring and making coffee and saying goodnight and waiting. That was, without question, the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Derek came home at 10:30 that night. He kissed me on the temple. He said he was tired. He went to bed. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't drink and a legal pad where I had started writing down every number I would need. The cost of a one-way flight to Spokane. The current rate for a studio apartment in the neighborhood where my mom still lived. The phone number for the Alaska Labor Relations Agency, which I had looked up because I had a feeling, a quiet building feeling, that Gary Fenwick's years of unpaid team-building events might be worth looking into at the Alaska Labor Relations Agency, it turned out, was very interested in Gary Fenwick. I'd spent 3 evenings in February doing research on my phone after Derek went to sleep, cross-referencing Alaska wage and hour laws with the specific language Gary had used when he told us the holiday party was team building and therefore unpaid. I found 2 relevant statutes. I wrote them down in the back of the same legal pad where I'd been doing my exit math. Then I called the agency's complaint line on a Thursday morning during my break, standing outside in the cold again, -4 this time, a step up from the night I'd called Tanya, and I explained the situation to a woman named Deborah, who had the calm, practiced manner of someone who had heard this exact story many times before and was not remotely surprised by it. "How many employees were required to attend?" she asked. 3, I said. "Me, Marcus, and our part-time weekend person, Caitlin." "And none of you were compensated?" "No." "And the event ran approximately how long?" "Setup started at 4. I left at 10:30. Marcus left at 8. Caitlin left at 9. I could hear her typing. "I'd like you to submit a written complaint," she said. "We'll open a review. Do you have any documentation? Texts, emails, the sign-up sheet?" I had taken a photo of the sign-up sheet on my phone the day Gary posted it. I had a text from Gary that said, and I quote, "Reminder party is this Saturday. Everyone's expected. This is not optional." I had Marcus's phone number, and I was reasonably confident he'd back me up. "Yes," I said, "I have documentation." I filed the complaint that weekend. I did not tell Gary. I did not tell Derek. I told Marcus because he deserved to know, and because his corroboration would matter. He looked at me across the counter with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, something between relief and respect, and said, "I was going to say something 6 months ago, but I didn't know how." "I know," I said. "Me neither." The 6 weeks I had given myself stretched to 8, not because I wavered. I did not waver, not once, not even on the nights when Derek was warm and easy and reminded me of who he'd been when I'd first loved him. I did not waver because I had learned in those months to separate feeling from deciding. I could feel sad about something and still know exactly what I was going to do about it. Those 2 things could exist at the same time. I had not known that before Ridge Creek. It was possibly the most useful thing I'd learned there. The extra 2 weeks were logistical. My flight, the apartment deposit Tanya had helped me wire, a conversation with my mom I had been putting off for longer than I should have. "I'm coming home," I told her on the phone. It was a Sunday in late March, and the light in Ridge Creek was finally starting to come back. Long, golden afternoons that felt almost cruel given what I was about to do. "When?" she said. 2 weeks. A pause. Then, "Does he know?" "Not yet." Another pause. Longer. My mom is not a woman who expresses emotion loudly. She expresses it through silence and through the quality of her silences. This one had weight to it. "You're sure?" she said finally. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." "Okay," she said. "I'll have the room ready." I told Derek on a Tuesday evening, 10 days before my flight. I had chosen Tuesday because it was his regular day off, which meant he would be home and sober and not rushed. I made dinner, real dinner, not takeout, because I wanted to be doing something with my hands for the first part of the conversation, and also because it seemed important to do this with some dignity. I made the pasta he'd always liked, the one with the Italian sausage and the canned San Marzano tomatoes, and I set the table, and when he sat down, I sat across from him and I said, before he could pick up his fork, "I'm leaving. I've booked a flight. I'm going back to Spokane." He set his fork down. He looked at me for a long moment without speaking, and in that moment, I saw something move through his face, not shock exactly, but the expression of a person who has been waiting for a particular thing to happen and has just watched it begin. "Zoe," he said. "I know about Renata," I said. "I've known since December. I saw you in the parking lot in February. I haven't said anything because I needed to make sure I had a way out before I said anything, and now I do." He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the pasta. "I'm not asking you to explain," I said. "I don't need an explanation. I'm telling you what's happening so you can make whatever arrangements you need to make." "This is... Zoe, can we just talk about this? Can we just..." "We can talk," I said, "but I'm still leaving in 10 days. That's not changing." He talked. He apologized. He said Renata was a mistake, which I did not believe, and he said he loved me, which I believed but which had stopped being sufficient information. He said we could go to counseling. He said we could move, leave Ridge Creek, start somewhere new, he'd transfer, he'd find something else, whatever I needed. He was earnest about all of it in the way that people are earnest when they've realized they're losing something and have just now decided they don't want to lose it. I listened to all of it. I ate the pasta. I said when he finished, "Derek, I followed you here. I left my job, my city, my entire support system. I have been making $14.50 an hour for 2 years without a single raise while you made 6 figures. I have been financially dependent on you in a way that made it difficult to leave, even when I knew I should. I'm not saying you engineered that on purpose, but it happened, and I'm done." He didn't have an answer for that, not a real one. He tried to argue about the money. He'd always been fair, hadn't he? He'd always covered the rent, and I let him finish, and then I said, "Being covered is not the same as being free." He went quiet after that, the kind of quiet that means something has landed. I flew out of Fairbanks on a Thursday morning in early April. Derek drove me to the airport. We barely spoke the whole 2 hours. When I got out of the truck at departures, I took the ring off my finger and held it out to him. He looked at it in my palm like he didn't recognize it. "Keep it," he said. "I don't want it," I said, and set it on the seat between us and closed the door and walked into the terminal without looking back. The Alaska Labor Relations Agency concluded their review in June. Gary Fenwick owed back wages to 3 employees, me, Marcus, and Caitlin, for the unpaid hours at the December holiday party, plus a penalty assessment for the violation. My share came to $312.50 in back wages, plus a $500 penalty that Gary was required to pay directly. It was not a life-changing sum of money. It was not supposed to be. It was supposed to be the correct answer to a simple question. Did your employer break the law? And the answer was yes. And now, There was a record of it, and Gary had to write 3 checks and have a very uncomfortable conversation with an agency investigator. And Marcus texted me a photo of his check with 3 exclamation points. I was back in Spokane by then. I was sleeping in my childhood bedroom for the first 3 weeks, which was humbling in the specific way that only moving back into the room you grew up in can be humbling. The same dresser, the same view of the neighbor's fence, the same ceiling that I had stared at when I was 17 and convinced my problems were enormous. I stared at it again at 31 and thought, okay, you've done harder things than starting over. Start over. I called Tanya the week I got back. We met at a coffee shop, a good one, in the downtown neighborhood where I used to work, and she brought me a latte and sat across from me and looked at me for a long moment before she said anything. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" "Less like someone waiting for something," she said. "More like someone who already knows what she's doing." I thought about that for a moment. "I think I've been making plans in my head for so long," I said, "that by the time I actually did it, it felt less like a leap and more like a step I'd already taken 100 times. She nodded. She understood. She's the kind of friend who understands things without needing you to explain them all the way. I got a job within 3 weeks, not at a coffee shop, though I could have. A small specialty roaster in Spokane's South Hill neighborhood was looking for an operations manager, someone who could handle sourcing, training, and the administrative side of running a multi-location small business. I applied with a resume that honestly accounted for everything I'd actually done at base camp: the customer growth numbers, the menu development, the training, the inventory management, and I got the job at $52,000 a year with benefits and a 401k match that made me sit in my car after the offer call and grip the steering wheel and breathe slowly for about 45 seconds before I trusted myself to drive. I paid Tanya back in full by September. She cried a little when I handed her the check. I told her to stop it. She said she wasn't crying about the money. I knew. Derek called twice in the first month after I left. I answered the first call. He wanted to know if I was okay, which was kind, and whether there was any chance, which was not something I could give him. I told him I was fine and that there wasn't. He called a second time 2 weeks later, and I let it go to voicemail. The message was 3 minutes long and mostly him talking in circles. I listened to it once and deleted it. I did not call back. I heard from Marcus in August that Renata had transferred to a different campsite in the summer, something about a project completion and a new assignment. I didn't ask for more details. It wasn't information I needed. What I needed, what I had been building toward, without always knowing the shape of it, was this: a job that paid me what I was worth, in a city where I could breathe, with a savings account that was mine, and a credit score that I was building back up from the ground because I'd let so many of my own accounts go dormant during the Ridge Creek years. Those things took time. They took most of that first year, but I had time, and I had Spokane, and I had my mom making coffee in the kitchen every morning in a way that made the house smell like something safe. By December, a different December, my first back in Washington, I had moved into a studio apartment 6 blocks from the roaster. It cost $975 a month, which I paid myself every month without asking anyone for anything. I put a small plant on the windowsill. I bought real dishes for the first time in my life, not fancy ones, just a set of 4 from Target, white with a simple rim, the kind that would last. I stood in my kitchen the first evening in that apartment, holding a mug of tea, looking out at the street below, at the ordinary Tuesday evening movement of people going places, and I thought, this is it. This is the thing I was trying to get to. Not a dramatic ending, not a scene with music swelling and someone running through an airport, just a woman standing in her own kitchen, in her own apartment, on her own terms, drinking tea she made herself, owing nothing to anyone. I had followed a man to the edge of the map once. I had let the map shrink around me until the only exit I could see was the one he controlled. And then I had spent 8 weeks quietly, methodically building a door of my own. Not a dramatic door, Not a door anyone would make a movie about, just a functional one that opened from the inside. That's the part nobody tells you about getting out of something that's trapped you. It's not a single moment of courage. It's a series of small, deliberate acts performed while you're still inside the trap. A phone call here, a number written down there, a complaint filed, a flight booked, a ring set down on a truck seat, and a terminal walked into without looking back. I learned in Ridge Creek that financial dependence is not love. I learned that following someone is not the same as choosing the same direction. I learned that a door that only opens from the outside is not a home, it's a room. And I learned, standing in my own kitchen in December, that the most important thing I'd ever built wasn't a relationship or a career, or even the exit I'd finally found my way through.